Action.
Hi, I'm Greg Emerson here with my brother from another mother, Charlie. He takes our yoga courses on the cold water Thermogenesis trips. We share three big interests. Well, we share lots of interests, but the three big ones relevant to today are our skiing and surfing, our yoga and meditation, and our cold water thermogenesis. I wanted to talk to Charlie a little bit today about how he got into those three areas and what he's got out of them. And Charlie and I first met when I was travelling to Wanaka to run some wilderness first aid courses with a mutual friend of ours, Ben Logan. And Charlie, fortunately, but unfortunately for him, volunteered to be the crash test dummy and had all sorts of things shoved up his nose and tourniquets put on his legs, teaching the courses. And Charlie's now moved back to Australia and teaches the yoga and meditation and helps me teach the cold water thermogenesis on our weekend trips. So how did you go from the Sunshine Coast in Australia to the mountains of Wanaka? What happened with that?
I guess you got to go back into the history a little bit. I've been a mad skier and spent several years as a ski bum in my earlier 20s, and after skiing for a while, transitioned from the Sunshine Coast across the Tasman to Wanaka involved going and doing my yoga teacher training, which is something I've always been really interested in, from doing lots of triathlon and trying to become, my original reason for doing yoga was to become more efficient in triathlon, because it's a long distance endurance race, and so the more efficient you are, which involves flexibility, the faster you go for a longer time. And so I really got into yoga, and I'm still doing it today because I found there's been lots of benefits, and I guess that's evolving as well, because I haven't probably got to the full extent of what it can be. So, just like with anything you do in life, more practice comes to perfection, and that's why I continue it, because I don't know where it'll end up, but so far it's all been positive.
So did you enjoy living in Wanaka?
Love Wanaka. Wanaka, vibe, the people that it attracts, the action sports you can do, the wilderness at your fingertip, like in any direction out of Wanaka. 15 minutes drive, you're in the wilderness, and you can ski, you can snowboard, you can rock climb, you can mountain hike, you can jump in cold waters, you can go fly fishing, you can go on jet boating, bungee jumping, and those are all the action things. And then all the people that get attracted to the area generally love all those things, so you've got a great group of mates that you can go out and experience those things with. So every experience is heightened when you can share them with people that believe in the same things. So yeah, I absolutely love Wanaka.
Well, that's what they found. That's what they found with the blue zones too, didn't they? They found that it doesn't really matter what you did, but the fact that you did with a small group of people that you loved and a small group of people who supported you in whatever you did made a huge difference. I mean, you can do everything you can eat the world's most fantastic organic food and get the world's most fantastic exercise, but if you're doing it on your own without a support group or a peer group or a faith, you weren't going to get nearly the same benefit as you did if you had that great peer group and that faith. So of those three areas that we particularly share in common, and there's probably a fourth with the Tantra training that both you and I have done that we're interested in. Let's start off with probably the yoga, because it's a big part of all the others. The yoga practice is a big part of the surfing and the skiing, and the yoga practice is a big part of the cold water thermogenesis we do, and the yoga is a big part of the Tantra training that we've done. What did you find has been the big benefit from you from doing yoga? Because, and I'm not talking about yoga from purely spirit. I mean, I suppose there's a spiritual aspect of yoga, but particularly from the physical aspects, because I'm astounded by how many 60-year-old men come to see me with back pain and muscle stiffness and they don't really understand the necessity for flexibility training and as we get older. So from your perspective, what has yoga given you in your life?
Actually, I really got into it at a stage where I had a slip disc in my lumbar spine, and doctors had told me that, okay, they said you're gonna have to get an operation and you'll never run again. And I was like, bullshit, that's not going to happen. I'm not getting an operation. I'll go and get some other advice. And I ended up doing an intense 6 months of yoga on the Sunshine Coast, along with massage and chiro work, and I fixed it, and my back's been fine ever since. So that's the physical side of it. And then because I was interested in yoga, I went off to Bali and I studied my yoga teacher training, and I learned that there's so much more to yoga than just the physical stretch. So the asanas of yoga, which is movement, the moves, accompanied with pranayama, the breath, accompanied by stillness and withdrawing from the senses and going into meditation, ultimately leads to samadhi, which is oneness with everything. So there's a huge spiritual side of it, and I believe that I've become more aware on the spiritual level. Definitely, as you go through life, you have more experiences that affect your life, and you have more worries, concerns the older you get, and so you're in your head more and you're living up here instead of in your body. So through breath work and movement, you get out of your head. When I'm practicing, I'm not thinking about the worries and the stresses of my daily life, and I'm coming out of my head and into the body, which is through the breath, and that's what I find great about yoga. So
and the breathing's been a big part of our cold water experience too, because there's no doubt that you can tolerate the cold water for longer and more efficiently, and the longer you can do it, the more mitochondria you develop, because your body wants to heat up, and so you develop more mitochondria to heat you up. And you and I have found the yoga breathing is particularly helped by hyperoxygenating our tissues and blowing off carbon dioxide and allowing us to tolerate the cold water longer to get more benefits from the cold water. Also helps us get into a more meditative state, which is the next area that you and I are really interested in, the meditation. We were discussing before the differences, different types of meditation, how it's always a good idea to try different forms. These are two different basic forms of transcendental meditation and the mindfulness meditation. Can you give us a run through the kind of differences? What's the main difference between a transcendental meditation and mindfulness meditation? Because personally, I'm not very good at sitting on the ground with my legs crossed, shouting out Om, because I've got a problem-solving brain, and my brain tends to fill with thoughts and problem solvings, whereas when I'm sitting in the cold water, sitting in the cold water, hello, good boy. Sitting in the cold water, I'm not thinking about any of my problems. I'm thinking about how I can, survive in the cold water, and I find it much more peaceful for me, because I empty my brain of all those thoughts, which I thought was the whole purpose of meditation. But you were explaining to me previously, while we're having a red wine, from a Pinot Noir from Marlborough in New Zealand at the treehouse in Belongil, that actually mindfulness meditation, you don't necessarily have to empty your mind of thoughts. In fact, you can become more aware of them, like when we're doing the yoga on our courses, when you can hear the birds and the wind in the trees and notice the colours more.
Okay, well, I'm not an expert, but my take on transcendental meditation versus mindfulness meditation is two different techniques. Transcendental meditation was brought to the United States in the early 1950s, or late 1950s, by a guy called Maharishi from India, and he brought it from the Vedic side of learning. And this technique is using a mantra that you repeat to yourself, which only you know, which transcends ultimately all thought, and you transcend into a deep state of, bliss.
So the repeating the mantra is a form of transcendental meditation, where you free your mind of the other thoughts because you're concentrating so much on the mantra. Kind of like us concentrating on our breathing in the cold water.
Yeah, true. There's a couple of key words there, like you're not trying, it's just repeating, and you're not like, I've got to say this, 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 and trying. It's very relaxed, and it's almost like hypnosis, where the mantra has no meaning at all. It has no context that you repeat, and I think the purpose of having no meaning is that your mind can't wander into some sort of thought about that word.
I suppose it's a bit like when you're doing one of those Tony Robbins events, when you're doing walking across the hot coals, and he teaches you to just have this mantra in your brain of cool moss, cool moss, cool moss, to ignore the fact that your feet are really hot on those hot coals, helps you get across the hot coals. Same thing when you're repeating something when you're trying to free recently people burnt their feet doing the hot coal walk on a Tony Robbins event. It's because they stopped on the hot coals and held up their phones trying to take some photos for Instagram. Surprise, surprise, they burnt their feet. You're meant to doing it with your mind off the hot coals, which helps a lot. Same process.
And and getting across the coals really quickly, I'd imagine. I guess so. Similar process.
All right, now but that's versus mindfulness meditation.
So mindfulness meditation is being mindful of like all your senses, and being mindful of the thoughts, and mindfulness of your breathing, distractions on the outside. So all your senses are sort of controlled into a state where you're aware of your thoughts.
But those who explained to me before, those thoughts might not necessarily be how much money you owe on the mortgage, or how you're going to solve the problem with your kids, or what you can do about your health. You were saying that you can teach yourself to take those thoughts out of the room, then you become much more aware of your actual peaceful surroundings.
Yeah, right? Well, that was with TM, with Transcendental Meditation. My teacher taught me that you may have thoughts coming and going. Your mind is always active. And the ultimate goal of both the meditation techniques is not to stop thoughts, because thoughts are impossible to stop. I mean, you'd have to be a guru of the highest level to stop all thoughts completely. So transcendental and mindfulness meditation isn't to stop thoughts, it's to be aware of the thoughts coming in. And one technique taught to me was, if a thought comes in, it's like an unwelcome guest. You know, you're in your house, you're cooking dinner for someone else, and then this unexpected guest comes at the door, knocks on the door and says, "Hey, what about me?" You say, "Well, actually, mate, I've got people here. You're going to just have to sit outside and wait until I'm done with what I'm doing here." And so you're putting that thought, you recognize it, you accept it, but then you say, later on. So it's not trying to fight thoughts that come into your mind. It's accepting, recognizing them, putting them to the side. And then that's a really good analogy for the effects of meditation afterwards, in that when life hits you with a whole lot of unexpected events, instead of reacting, you're responding to those events, and that's the flow state that ultimately you try and get into.
Seems to me that with transcendental meditation, ultimately the goal is to free your mind of all thoughts, and we know that stimulates alpha waves in the brain versus theta waves, but that may take you 10 years of living in a cave to be able to do that, whereas the mindfulness meditation, which seems to stimulate more theta waves, is more about, okay, I'm going to free up my mind of all the worrisome thoughts and become more aware perhaps of my surroundings, and that stimulates different ways. And we know during Tantra, when you combine all of that, when you combine the meditation and the thoughts and the breathing, that you can actually during that tantric experience, you can actually stimulate both alpha and theta waves, which is one of the great benefits, and I think the part of the physical, spiritual teaching of Tantra. Okay, so the other thing, so we've talked about yoga, we've talked about meditation, we've kind of alluded to the cold water thermogenesis. How have you found teaching the cold water stuff on the course?
Yeah, well, firstly, I love the cold water part of it.
What have you found it's done for you? Because I mean, I can sit here and talk all day about brown fat, white fat, making more mitochondria, decreasing heteroplasmy rates, reversing aging, decreasing wrinkles, living longer, less illness. All great, and I talk about that all the time. but today it's about you. What have you found for you personally about getting in that cold water?
Well, the cold water for me is very similar to either surfing or skiing, when you're like really focused in the moment. You know, you're paddling for a wave, and there's nothing else that you can think about except for paddling on that wave and getting up and riding the wave. Or skiing, where you're going down a really steep critical part and you don't want to fall over because there's consequences. And jumping into cold water, there's nothing else that you can think about except for, Christ, this is really cold, and like everything's tingling, your arms are freezing, and before they eventually go numb. So you're really, I guess, in the moment, and that's the similar, part to skiing and surfing that cold water thermogenesis has for me. And then I guess you go through it like you're in the moment, and it lasts, you might be in there 10 or 15 minutes, depending how cold the water is, trying to keep your shivering under control. And then once that's finished and you get out, you have a huge boost in energy. That's what I find. Like, you're cold for a while.
In fact, in our last trip, Erin was so into all those aspects that she managed to get out of the cold water and slip on the rocks and do the splits. So combined a little bit of yogic training with mindfulness training, with cold water stuff. So it seems like what you're saying, to summarize it, doesn't matter if we're talking about surfing, doesn't matter if we're talking about yoga and meditation, doesn't matter if we're talking about cold water thermogenesis, it doesn't matter if we're talking about tantra. It all comes down to, it seems that a big part of it is actually freeing up a lot of the thoughts of our brain, getting rid of stress, changing the waves in our brain, connecting with the earth, and taking your mind away from all the problems into a much more peaceful state, and doing it with a group of peers, group of friends, group of mates, who share some sort of faith in that system, which we know from the blue zones and from tribal situations in the past have given us a lot of not only energy but also health. Yeah. Seems that's the common denominator in all those things you've just talked about.
Yeah, physically, your body, mentally, spiritually, all these things come in combination, I guess.
All right.
And yeah, the yoga helps you move, to surf and ski, and the cold water, it gets you out of your head and into your body, same as the yoga, out of your head and into your body.
Also gets you hopefully out of, we try and combine it with getting out of the city, getting out of the blue light, getting out of the electromagnetic frequencies. We don't do our yoga in some blue lit studio. We don't do our cold water thermogenesis in a cryotherapy chamber in a blue lit thing. We do it here at Byron Bay, or up in the hinterland where we're in the sand, we're in the sea, we're under the stars, under the moon, in the sun, getting our vitamin D.
I mean, it's really simple. Like everything in nature, we come from nature. This is going to sound really
it was a revolutionary thought, but it's
no,
but it seems to be a revolutionary thought these days, but it's common sense.
But it isn't common sense apparently these days, because so many people live and breathe in the city, and we're getting softer and softer. Like these small stresses that you put on your body, like jumping into cold water, only makes you more resilient. The point is that small stresses make you stronger, and it helps you adapt and survive. And this is what we're trying to do, and it's all delivered to you in nature. Like you can't rely on technology to save your ass in the future, and that's where humanity's going. And I think nature has the answers.
Nature has the answer. Let's summarize. Let's conclude the session with nature has the answer. It's getting cold. Sun's going down. I gotta go get my sunset photos. The treehouse is calling us with some red wine and some local caught snapper.